I don't really like the term avid outdoorsman. I simply prefer the term avid outdoorswoman. I have been very fortunate to grow up in the woods of Florida and have spent a lot of my life outdoors in several parts of the United States. I have spent thousands of hours up here in the woods of northern Florida. I have also had over 20 big game animals on my license. I have heard the whoops and screams at night, and I do not think they are of human in origin. I have also seen what many believe to be the skunk ape, or Bigfoot, as you might call him. The first time was back in 1977, in a wooded area of Baldwin, right near the river, on the way to the Everglades. I was on a hike with my father to pick some mushrooms, while my mother and sister followed along in the car. It was late in the day, and I was tired from walking, so I decided to sit on a fallen log for a break. I sat on one end, and my father on the other. In front of me was a very shallow ravine, and it was in this area that I saw two animals. I could only see them about halfway up, as I only had a view of their backs. They were covered in hair. The first was dark brown and the second was black. They were leaning against a pine tree, eating what I now believe to be mushrooms in hindsight. I was scared by this sighting. I did not know what to do. And I nudged my father and said to him, "Look, are those monkeys? Are they eating mushrooms?" He told me, "They're not monkeys, you idiot. That's not what they're eating." He tried his best to downplay the whole issue, even though he had to have been seeing the same thing I was. He did not get up to have a look, and neither did I. We just sat there on the log, dumbfounded, watching them. In retrospect, there were a lot of things I should have noticed, but at the time, I was only a kid and young, and as such, I did not pay attention to more of the finer details. I would have to guess that the first ape was about 7 feet tall, and the second was probably about 9 or 10. They were both still large, but the black one was huge, very massive shoulders, chest, and thick arms. We watched them for about 10 minutes, and somehow my father was in complete denial. They must have picked up on our presence and left the area. We never saw them again. I told nobody about it. In fact, I did not tell anyone about it until many years later. Now let me clear this up. It's not like they were just standing right in front of us, putting on a show. They were off enough in a distance where we were kind of hidden, tucked away by the forest, so they had to have looked up at us to see we were there, and we kind of just had a perfect view, since they were sort of in a clearing. Another time, I was driving a friend down in Nocatee, near the St. Johns River at about 10 at night. We were driving along a wooded area, and by the way, this is farther in the future. I saw a large object in the road ahead of us. I stopped the car, and as I did, what I saw seemed to stand up, and I realized that it was not a man. I was within 10 feet of it, so I could see the bright red eyes, which I think were just reflections from my car light, much the same way a cat's does or a deer when you shine a light into their eyes. But I remember it being very scary, the face being hairless more than anything else, as well as its massive arms and shoulders, kind of like what I experienced as a child. I also remember that there was no way it could have just simply been a man in a suit. It was too big, and the arms and torso were massive. It was also a very dark brown. And by this time, my friend and I were scared to death. I quickly accelerated the car. We never told a soul about it. I thought about it, but was almost sure that it was a Sasquatch. However, now, I am 90% sure that I had a Bigfoot sighting. I wish I could be 100% sure, but I know what I saw just was not a man in a suit. I don't know if it is still around, but I still live in Jacksonville, and that other 10% of me is so skeptical because it's hard for me to process that part of reality that society and everyone around you tells you does not exist. Anyway, I've also been paying attention to the news more lately, and I'm a bit surprised that stories like this don't gain more attention. You hear things here and there about livestock being killed and torn apart, but unfortunately, those segments don't get very long. I know Florida is crazy for all kinds of things, cryptid sightings and paranormal. Also, a lot of the terror that went on down here between the natives and people taking over, but that's a different story. If anything, while I'm still skeptical, I try to keep my eyes much more open now. I'm 26 years old and have had a lifelong fascination with the paranormal of all kinds, cryptozoology included. I grew up outside of Fort Walton, Florida, which is located in northwestern Florida. In fact, most of northwest Florida is pretty rural, even today. We had the usual stories about the swamp ape, Bigfoot, and other mysterious creatures, but none of them seemed to strike a chord with me until the Jersey Devil. From the ages of 8 to 14, I was heavily into books on the paranormal and cryptozoology. I could not get enough information on the subject. It was a fascination at first, but soon became an all-consuming passion. As I aged, I actually became a BFRO field investigator and have spent the last 5 years in the field investigating reports of potential Bigfoot activity in the state. As I got older, the Jersey Devil seemed more like a real creature and not just folklore. I've followed many cryptid researchers in my time and have been a fan of your show since the beginning. I truly thank you for all the hard work you've put into your show, especially the research you put into each and every episode. Now, to my experience. While I was in the Army, for about 6 months, I was stationed at Camp Blanding in Florida, which is roughly about an hour west of Jacksonville. In fact, most of northern Florida is very rural and wooded with lots of swamps and bayous. Camp Blanding is located in a very rural area, surrounded by a lot of woods and swamps. I was assigned to a computer operations battalion, which is not very populated, and only a few people were even in my section. We had to make sure that all the computers in the battalion operated at 100% capacity, and we had to respond to maintenance issues as they arose. I'd been on duty for about 10 hours, and I was a bit tired. So, I opened the barracks door to cool off for a bit. I had planned to go to my room and rest for a few minutes, then go back to work. In the barracks there was just a hallway that led from the front door. To the left was the office and commander's room, which was to the right. For some reason, I turned right and made my way to the end of the hallway. If you've ever been inside a barracks, you know that there's a door at the end of each hallway. I stood at the door, looking outside, though I still don't know why. As I was standing there, the door was close enough so that I could prop it open with my foot. I looked out and saw a clearing in front of me. The only thing around was a smaller tree. I was looking at a tree and I swear, I'm not making this up. This small brown head popped out from behind it, and I immediately felt very cold and shaking with fear. I know that might sound like an exaggeration, but this feeling came over me that I can't quite describe. This creature was about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, big red eyes, a devil-like nose, very exaggerated features and bat-like ears, and was small and kind of more pudgy. It took a couple of steps from behind the tree, crossed the clearing, and went into the woods on the other side. The creature's steps were very loud and very unnatural. I believe it must have had legs that were attached to a short, stocky body. The way it walked, it seemed like it had a very long, strong legs. It's very difficult to explain. It had small but stocky arms, and I didn't see anything that looked like a tail. The best way to describe it was a small brown-skinned Batman. The fact that it crossed the clearing the way it did, the mismatched sounds it made when it took steps, and the way it seemed to disappear into the woods, all made me believe this was simply impossible for it to be a human in a costume. I immediately went and told my commander, who thought I was crazy. I believe he thought I was pulling an April Fool's prank, though it wasn't in April. I had nobody else to tell, and I was in a very rural area with no urban areas for about 50 miles. Basically, I was screwed. I had to go back to my normal life with nobody to confide in. I've told few people about my encounter, but I'm not sure if they believe me or not. I just got the show's email today, so I decided to share my experience with you. I've not told anybody else this story because people would think I was crazy. All I can tell you is that I've seen many strange things in the woods, but none of them were as big or strange as the thing I saw that day at Camp Blanding. I'm a big-time Bigfoot enthusiast. My wife and I caught a glimpse of one 2 years ago in the Apalachicola National Forest here in northern Florida. This past Tuesday, on October 7th, I had the pleasure of seeing one again along with 2 other onlookers. I was deer hunting in the same national forest near Pinhook Swamp Road. I was dragging a fresh deer kill to our vehicle when I looked up and seen a large, dark, hair-covered creature standing upright and erect, looking at us from behind a cypress tree. It was roughly 80 yards away, and its eyes were as dark as a pair of black bowling balls. It stood at 7 feet tall. I have also been a police officer for more than a decade. I have seen more dead bodies than I care to remember. I have seen more weird things than I care to remember. This thing was the last thing I ever expected to see. I was so amazed that my mouth hung wide open. I looked at my hunting buddy who was standing right there next to me and said, "Did you see that?" And he just said, "I don't know what it was, but I've never seen anything like it before. I do not want to see it again." So, I've been telling people about it ever since. I've hunted the national forest of this area all my life. I don't want to admit it, but I've seen some things that seem unexplainable. Dismembered and bodied deer, bear heads, hordes of butterflies around corpses, which was very strange, frogs, huge snakes, and now this thing has me shook to the bone. It makes me wonder if there's a whole family of them in this area. I'll let you know if I ever encounter it again. I want this to be taken seriously. I want people to know of my experience, and I'm sure others will want to share similar stories. Thanks for listening. I'm a truck driver who has been roaming the highways of America since 1979. Those who know me can personally vouch for my veracity in the grand scheme of life and the fact that I'm not an inveterate liar, nor am I a compulsive fantasizer. As a matter of fact, I'm a big wolf fan and keep up on all the activities involving these magnificent creatures. I've been in awe of these things since before I even knew wolves existed, at least the large ones that we commonly know to as dire wolves. I still retain the memory of seeing my very first wolf man in my hometown of Quincy, Florida, back in June of 1980. It was a Friday night, around 11 p.m. I was an 11-year-old boy, riding my bicycle back from a small neighborhood convenience store called McCoy's. I just purchased some Hostess cupcakes. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I also got a couple of cream sodas to enjoy back home. I was approaching my street after turning around a corner in the residential neighborhood when a man, or what I thought was a man, crossed my path about 20 feet ahead of me as I pedaled slowly and continuously in that same direction. My first impression was that it was somebody in a wolf costume, and they had not seen me riding my bike toward them. Then, my second impression was that it was somebody who was either mentally deficient or in some kind of mental or physical stress. This is because this man or wolf or creature was walking very carefully on the outside ditch with his back to me on his hands and feet. I did not see its face, but I did notice that it was wearing torn clothing, much the same way fantasy and pop culture depicts somebody who would turn into a werewolf, how their clothes are torn. I'm not saying werewolves are real, but that's what this person looked like. As I watched it move quickly across the street, I have also observed that its fur was very long and shaggy, and its hips and buttocks were very pronounced, and that it seemed to kind of resemble a bear. This animal was definitely moving upright as it crossed the road and made no sound whatsoever, not even in its movements. So, I didn't say anything at the time, but the next morning, I asked my parents if any drugs were on the streets the previous night that would turn people into wolfmen. They looked at me strangely and thought I was weird for asking that question. I don't blame them. I could not get this animal out of my mind. Well, about 2 months later, I was again at the store buying a couple of items. I had to cross the street to get back to my house as I rode my bike slowly through traffic and noticed this man lying on its stomach on the far side of the road. I again thought it was somebody who had maybe been drinking and fell into the ditch and could not get up. This time, I did see the face, and it was definitely human. I parked my bike and crossed over to the ditch to see if I could help him. He was a he and in tattered, ripped up clothing. He seemed very dirty. I suspected he was homeless at the time, but now that I look back on this, I'm not so sure. He also was very hairy and unkempt. And at the time, I kind of sneered and snickered to myself, thinking that he was the Wolfman. But he just kept giving me funny looks. I'm not sure why, like he knew me or something. Anyway, once I helped him up, he was kind of rude and didn't even really thank me. He just kind of ran off. He kind of seemed weird. But now, all these years later, I wonder if he was indeed the Wolfman, or I guess not a werewolf, but a shapeshifter. While I don't believe the traditional werewolf stories of somebody changing under a full moon, I do believe that people, through the use of black magic and satanic rituals, can shapeshift into demonic beings, like a werewolf, or, in this case, a giant upright walking wolf. As I've stated before in the very first part of the story, I've been a huge fan of direwolves since my brother would read me fantasy books at a very young age. So I think that's one of the reasons why this stuck with me so much. After this happened, I never did see that man again. In fact, that was really the last of my strange encounters. So I hope you enjoy that story for the time being. Thank you. I have some stories as a child that are vivid as yesterday's events. I began hunting hogs and deer and birds at the age of 10. I'm now 62, and have hunted and fished virtually almost always since I was 10. I am obsessed with the outdoors. I also have a very keen sense of smell, sight, and hearing. I can tell you where a hog went, or a buck, or even a fish. I'm just kidding, I'm not that good. I've also found a prehistoric bird's nest, or what I believe to be at least. And my grandfather apparently found a giant hog skull from the Long Pine Key found right around 1927. Apparently it had horns on it. He's also chased panthers and has seen red-eyed bipedal canine. I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. It appears to run in my family. And like him, I believe I've also seen a werewolf. I was driving to my sister-in-law's house on a dark road toward home, in my little red sedan, with my daughter and a friend in the 1970s, near Florida. This is right before I moved to Pasco County. As I was driving down a straight road, with a full moon and bright stars, I saw something large crossing the road in front of me. I assumed at first it was a Florida panther, because of the long tail, and then I thought that it looked completely different, and not like that. It was reddish-brown, more canine, and I could see its muscles. As it moved quickly, hunched over, you could see its hind legs and the incredible muscle definition. I don't mean to be strange, but it was beautiful, and so fast, and I was amazed, not scared or in shock. Sure, I was a little shocked at what I was seeing, but the magnificence of such a creature. It was about 70 yards away, I estimate, when it crossed. At this point, I was close to my sister-in-law's house, so I turned around to look for it again. I drove back about a quarter mile, looking in both directions for the panther or wolf or whatever it was, but did not see anything. I got back to my sister-in-law's house and told her what I saw. She told me that there are no panthers or wolves out here. I explained to her that there was a big reddish wolf or panther crossing the road in front of me, and she just said, "You were probably driving too fast and just imagine it." I explained to her I was only going about 50, slowing down to make sure it was safe to come around a bend. I knew what I saw wasn't a wolf or a panther. It was something else. Surprisingly, she heard me out, but I don't think she really believed me. That's okay, though. I don't think anybody would believe me after all. I still don't know what it was. I say it was a werewolf, but to be honest, it happened so fast, I didn't really get a good look at it. It was just a strange-looking large creature. But I can tell you, the size of it alone was beautiful. and the muscle definition, I'll never forget it. So I'm going to lean towards wolf. I'm very familiar with deer. I mean, I've seen just about every kind here of Florida animal out here in the woods. And I know wolves. This, though, was different. I'm currently 53. I'm a male, and I reside in northern Florida. My wife and I have lived at this particular location for about 3 years now. I have looked at many of the related websites involving cryptids, but in this particular account from the BFRO, I have been very interested in these particular encounters for a number of reasons. Was hoping you could do a show dedicated to these. Now, I have just this morning stumbled across 2 recent accounts that you might find of interest. The first is a sighting in 2010 by a man who was driving at night on Interstate 75 in Citrus County, Florida. The man states that he looked in his rearview mirror and saw what he thought at first was a very large bat, but then noticed it was also a very tall winged being. This was in the area where I actually live. I'm curious as to what it may have been. I use this same stretch of road quite frequently, and I'm always looking for stray animals. However, despite me looking, I have never seen anything like this. The second story involves a man from Lee County. This witness described seeing a red-eyed, beaked creature sitting in a tree. This is also in the same area where I am. I've heard some stories of strange activity in the woods and swamps, like the skunk ape, but nothing like this. I consider myself a skeptical believer. Although I do believe that there is much that we do not know, I won't believe everything. However, I believe that the so-called cryptids are very real, at least a handful of them. This particular case might be of interest because of the continuity of winged humanoids seen here in Citrus County. If you could discuss these on your show, I would be very grateful. I look forward to hearing back from you. I have lived in the same small town here in northern Florida since I was born. I've grown up in the woods and spent the majority of my life involved and surrounded by nature. I'm also a very active hunter and fisherman. But as of late, I've noticed an increase in paranormal activity in my area, specifically around my home. At first, I thought it was just maybe an increase of wildlife, but I'm not so sure it is anymore. Too many strange and bizarre occurrences. In fact, here's an example. I've noticed a few strange things on my property alone in the last couple months. Weird bird calls and howls and scratching sounds, metal dinging, strange howls that I've never heard before. All of this has really piqued my curiosity, so I've been trying to be more observant of my surroundings, more so than usual. If you're somebody like me and you're obsessed with the outdoors, you are already at peak level with your awareness, so I've kind of had to bump it up a couple of notches, because maybe my perception isn't as great as I think. I live right here in the middle of the woods, near a river. I'm also a night owl, and I enjoy being outside in the early morning hours, staying up late. I love to sit on the front porch at night, look at the stars and sip on coffee. So, the other night, I was on my front porch, looking up at the stars when I noticed movement in the trees, right in front of me actually. I was trying to figure out what it was, thinking it might be a black bear. And then I realized it was not a bear at all, because it was not walking on all fours, but rather 2 feet. Immediately, this freaked me out. Now before I go on, yes, I'm aware that black bears can stand up on 2 legs and can move, but not like this. The movement was so fluid and natural. I know for a fact that bears do not move like that on 2 legs. I went inside the house. I had heard through the grapevine that apparently there was a lot of Bigfoot activity in the panhandle of Florida, so I thought maybe that's what this was. The next day, I would sit in my backyard during the day and try to confirm what I saw the night before was, in fact, a Bigfoot. So that afternoon, I sat in my backyard, waiting for the sun to set. I have a dense tree line directly behind me, maybe 250 to 300 yards. I also have a narrow creek behind my backyard, maybe another 100 yards, and a larger swamp behind that, maybe another 100 yards. As the sun was setting, I heard some very loud but distinct wood knocking. I've made wood knocks before myself, but this was different. It sounded like somebody taking a large 2x4 and smacking it with incredible force against the base of a tree. It had a higher pitch and was more complex and tough to duplicate. I did not see anything else the rest of the night, but thought this would be a great opportunity to sit out there with my gun and fire some shots in the woods. Stupid, probably, but hopefully I was trying to let Bigfoot know to not mess around with me. I have heard that Bigfoot makes wood knocking sounds and also howls, that he lets you know when he's around. I know for sure he's out there, so I thought that this would be good. I went and got my .45 caliber handgun and started firing shots in the air. It got dark, but I was in the middle of the woods and can still faintly see from my lights. I heard some rustling in the creek, so I fired some more rounds in the sky. I heard a little more movement, and then I saw something big running from one side of the creek to the other, on 2 feet. It was moving very fast. I've been in the woods my whole life and I've never seen anything run as fast as that. I didn't see the face of it though, more the silhouette. It was taller than me for sure, and had very long, exaggerated arms. It kind of reminded me of a really large man with just long arms, running away. That's when I knew I had the chance, that this was indeed a Bigfoot. I knew it was simply not an ape. This creature looked more human, at least in stature and size. I did not want to go into the woods that night, as I'm not good at tracking or trying to find this thing, and let alone did not want to be alone with that thing. Who knows what it would do to me if it decided to be aggressive. I was concerned that this thing would kill me. I left and went back inside. I'm now thinking of a plan to how I can guarantee to keep them away from my property, just in case they get violent. Anyway, that's my story. I'm not the only person to report things out there like this, and I don't know how many other people have seen it. I feel like this area has more than one of those things living here. I also don't want to forget to include that from my back porch, the woods are clear and sparse enough that you can actually see down into the creek from where the angle of my back porch is. So that's how I was able to see this thing all those yards away. And when there's enough light outside, you can still see. In fact, there's many times that after 10 p.m., I could still make out the silhouettes of deer drinking from the creek all the way down there. Perhaps Bigfoot eat deer, and perhaps that's why it was at the creek. Maybe it was hunting deer. I don't know. Maybe it was hunting on my property. Maybe it was wanting to hunt me.